I hope you're ready.
I hope everybody's ready. I don't need to be that ready. Considering the warm-up we had before, I suggest a small change. The raise hand mechanism is nice, but I can't see whether you want to react to the question or whether you want to bring up a new topic. So I suggest we use that to say that you want to bring up a topic, want to ask a question, and that we use actually our video screens to react to the topic that's currently being discussed by raising your hand physically. So I'm looking at my screen, whether there's anybody that wants to start off the discussion. Yeah, it's again Thilo. So yes,
yeah, so
you can start.
It's already becoming a theme here. So I just want to thank everybody for this really interesting workshop. Before I forget to mention that, and I think I learned a lot, at least from all the presentations. And for me as a clinician scientist, it's certainly very interesting to see that there are solutions coming along, technical solutions, which are really, really important for that kind of approaches. And we've seen these like eBrain, which certainly can serve as a blueprint and are scalable and adaptable solutions. Adaptable also in the sense that adaptable to legal aspects. And I'm sure we will see the emergence of a kind of a shared European ecosystem on the technical workflow. And I appreciate that a lot. On the same note, however, I'd like to say that there are issues beyond the technical solutions, which I think are maybe even more important for the stakeholders to address at this point, at least, because I think we need your help in making the process of data sharing easier for us, to guide us, like to have a set of guidelines that are kind of easy to follow, also to move along with issues of international data sharing within the European Union, but also outside of the European Union. Many of us have international partners in Canada, the US, and elsewhere, where this needs to be addressed. So that is some help I'd like to ask for, and also think about incentivizing data sharing for the researcher who is or clinicians out there. And to data sharing within the open science concept. I think these are two very important aspects that are kind of left out of the discussion if we focus too much on the technical aspects of data sharing.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I think the 2 points that you bring in helping sharing in as a whole concept, not only technical solutions, and I've written down here as well the incentives or the value that's provided by data sharing. I think that's 2 topics that we definitely need to discuss. So let's take the first topic, the global helping of sharing data. Can we? Is anybody wanting to react to that? From the EBRAINS side or from the HBP side? I see no hands raised. Philip, yes, you go.
I think, you know, the point raised by Thilo is extremely important. I'm very sensitive to this issue because we're facing this problem behind technology every day when it comes to sharing clinical data. It's a little bit a chicken and the egg issue. Where do we start from? Because eventually we need data controller. Petra was correct by saying that the appropriate way to call what I've been calling data owners, but we understand each other. We need data controller to be engaged in that process from the time they collect data, even if it is for their own specific research project or during clinical practice, but by having some kind of general consent that more and more hospitals implement and propose to every patient coming to the clinic. Because if it's not down from the very beginning, then we face so much barrier to make the data truly available. But then to engage a large community into thinking from the time they collect data that they might well share it after having made their own first publication, you also need to create an ecosystem and incentive. At least that's the way that I see the eBrain infrastructure as, being sufficiently robust and mature so that we can start engaging the community in addressing the other problems that are also extremely important. I completely share your view on this. So I think eBrain as a first step to then engage a community.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to pick up on that?
So if I may, I would like to. I agree completely also with the point made first by Thilo, that we need incentives and motivators. And I also agree with what Jan said, that with eBrains, we are taking care of many of the issues, the legal issues, the technical issues, and many other consortia work on the same things. And there are solutions, obviously, that are feasible, and we learn about them. So there will be progress. But another big challenge at the moment is indeed the lack of incentives and motivation. I think one source of motivation are success stories. So if it is clear that you can make better science with the new technology, data management, and so forth, this will be a big motivator, of course. But this is not sufficient because it takes some time to generate these success stories. So many people invest now a lot of their time and resources into solving the problems, but in the moment this does not get sufficient recognition, I think. And there I see the responsibility with the policymakers, with the funding agencies to really overthink their way of selecting proposals, for example, or distributing resources. I think it is extremely important to make clear that even though data per se should not always be required to be shared, but they should be treated according to clear data management plans. Having a data management plan should be a standard. And of course, this takes time and resources. So there need to be resources provided by the funding agencies in order to have such expertise staff available who can take care of this. Indeed, this can be not all with the scientists. We need to have the experts on board and we need to pay for them. This needs to be part of every lab, of every research institution. There needs to be staff foreseen for this. Yeah, that's my comment on this so far.
Helle, you wanted to comment on that?
Yes, of course, because I mean, Petra did ask for funders' perspective. I think I should say something. Well, for several funding agencies, national and international, of course, also the European Commission funded projects at DMP is now standard. And all of you have undergone the pains of constructing that one. It's for some projects it's really difficult, but anyway, this is standard now. And some projects have to provide it in the beginning of a project before funding even can start. Others do ask them half a year or a year later as a living document, which can be annually modified and altered, and only the final one is then the one which has to be submitted together with the final report of the project. And the other point is that several funding organizations already, including Neuron, we do fund people if they work on data management. So if you have to have staff, let's say for half a year, for a year, to do DMP and take care of data governance and everything, you can of course apply for such a position. This is not a problem to apply for such a position. It is no restriction.
Fully agree. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, that was it. Thank you.
Yeah, Petra.
If I may just quickly react to this, so I'm aware of these measures and I appreciate them. I think the motivation pressure should be even increased. So, for example, also in terms of publication, it should be clear that data can be requested and are made available. So we are all aware of that replication, or what is termed reproducibility, is actually a replication crisis. I think if I'm looking into this because I'm involved in several informatics sub-projects of collaborative research centers, and I see what is the real life these days in the research labs, and it's a disaster still in terms of data management and structured organization, and also long-term storage of data, archiving. All this is in many cases still very rudimentary and needs to be improved. And I think if the funding agency work in that direction, that is very helpful.
Yeah. Martin and Damien. Martin first.
I put this discussion already as part of the conclusions and potential next steps section. One thing I'd like to bring in here, I come, while I'm part of neuroscience and done much in neuroinformatics in recent years, part of my training was also on molecular biology. And one perspective I'd like to bring in that discussion is molecular biology, especially the sequencing side of it, has undergone that transformation where data sharing and linking to data resources and indices used for sequence analysis are part of what the community is doing. And how this happened, well, for the most part, I mean, everybody links back to their sequencing service, is that the reviewers of publications demanded that information to be able to review publications. So I think for some of these things, we might need to look at mechanisms that we as community can bring to move forward some of these transformations we want to see in the various roles that we have in this process of saying, I'm sorry, I'm unable to review your publication because I don't know what reference system this is aligned to. Mm-hmm. Or things like that. So I think we can be an active part in raising the standards here and make this really a dialogue with the other stakeholders in that conversation, from funders to policy to people at our home organizations, of saying, research office, you need to support me on this one. Stuff like that. That's it.
Damien?
Okay, yeah, I just want to react to another aspect of Thilo's comment, which is international collaborations. It's good that we're having this discussion at the European level, considering the influence of the GDPR, but also there has to be a global discussion on data sharing in neuroscience data also, considering cultural differences and regulatory differences that neuroscience data interact with. And such discussions have started at the International Brain Initiative level, but it's still at its early stages.
No. Okay, I think.
Can I also add something there, because I'm quite involved with several international data sharing projects, and at this point, all the work that goes into solving data sharing issues are done by the scientists themselves. So there's virtually no help at all by legal departments. They, in the contrary, and they always have a problem with everything, let's say, and we try to solve these along the way. And this stresses so much the role of the role that incentives play, because that's basically down to the huge motivation that the researchers have to overcome these barriers. And I would predict that if, let's say, a funding agency like or funding body like Neuron would, I'm not saying that they are, but would call for every piece of data that is collected in a project to be directly open to science without a separate incentive scheme for the researchers, then the clinicians will be gone. They won't interact, they won't engage with that kind of work, because it's just too much work to put in. So that's the threat I was referring to at the beginning. We're, as a clinician, we always have to have this kind of balance between seeing patients and taking care of the patients, but also at the same time we're very much engaged in science. But if the science aspect then in this data sharing aspect becomes too difficult to tackle, and it's basically up to us to overcome these barriers, then it's going to create a huge problem. And I think that this stresses again the real danger that without appropriate incentives for the researchers, you won't overcome the open science and data sharing problem.
Yeah, I think I was going to react to that. I mean, I heard your initial question is like, okay, we need incentives, and we have talked a lot about taking away the bottlenecks, let's say, that we create, or the hurdles that are being created by legal and other aspects. But I also feel there should be more in why should you share the data? If it's any reason that gives you more work, why then would you go through that? So there should also be some value coming back from sharing that data, and that's quite interesting. Hella, yes, please.
Sorry. Well, I mean, hang on. One of the incentive is certainly that your data, if they are open available, provides a credibility that is enormous an incentive in itself. And the other incentive, as far as I can see, is also on a social level. It provides you with the knowledge that you have done something for society, for the health development, that other people will enable to work upon your data, to use your one. As the same for your next hypothesis generation, you will need to search a lot of data from other people. The more you can better generate a hypothesis for your next project, which you're going to apply somewhere with. And I mean, the incentives are so much, if they are on a responsibility level, they are on a social level, they are on a moral, ethical level. I mean, these are all incentives in the general context of having valid data which are credible and reusable. That is an incentive. This is totally apart from any peculiar money terms, so funding terms, and I think we should really separate these two dimensions clearly from one another.
Mm-hmm. Petra, you wanted to react?
Yes, so I think, I mean, these are good motivators to probably everybody participating here in the meeting, and this is why we are participating here in the meeting. But if you speak to the general scientists, this is not sufficiently motivating. So if you really look into the individual labs and not the people who are sitting here because they're interested in the subject, the world looks extremely differently. And so the question is, are you investing your time into the next Nature paper where it is actually not required to provide all your data and make them available, including the primary data? Or are you investing your time in developing reproducible workflows, having a little technical publication perhaps, but no recognition in the scientific field? This is the situation how it poses today.
Mm-hmm. Mara, I see you also raising your hand for a while now.
Yes. No, it's just, I mean, all these points are also applicable to preclinical data, right? And it's also our problem at the preclinical level. And of course, the problems are slightly different, but we also need support for the data management plan. We also need to make it easy for scientists, and you know, not just to and I come back to Philippe's point before, right? Not only to archive the data, but also to have a clear idea of how to do it. And I was looking at EBRAINS is a great initiative, frankly speaking, so congrats. But for example, there are some parts when you get to try to use this data that make it quite complicated. For example, the IDs, no, the identificators for the data, they are different in each data set, or the descriptors, the data descriptors, the quality is very uneven across different data sets. I just looked at the morphology in mice because this is the ones that I'm interested in. But it's quite difficult. And then the other problem that I was mentioning before, but we didn't have time, I didn't hear any answer to that. And Petra also mentioned that, and I think it's very important, and it's archiving and long-term archiving. And archiving raw data also, because, you know, the analysis tools are changing, and we also need the raw data. And of course, I think it was Martin mentioning the omic platforms. That's fine, but when you go for example, for meta-analysis, the quality is so different if you are using a microarray or RNA-seq or whatever, and Illumina versus other platforms. So it's really complicated, and you know, it's quite a nightmare to be able to navigate these platforms and find data that you can really reuse. No, so I think this is also a point that we should look at.
Yes. No, it's a very good point. I think Jan wanted to react to that point specifically. Yeah.
This is clearly a very useful discussion. So I wanted to react to the last comment, which I think is a very important one. Yes, this is exactly what we want. So in a way, to really move this forwards, you need a strong alliance between projects and researchers who are really motivated and interested in creating the type of well-curated, documented with proper data descriptors and so on, go that extra mile. In our history, you found, and I appreciate that, the tracks of the early days. And we could even ask the question, should we take it out? Should we go back to those who originally prepared that and say, well, come on, guys. You were forced to do this in the Human Brain Project 2-3 years ago. The climate was a bit different. Now we're getting professional. Take it away or do it properly, right? Okay, I think they can take this criticism. I agree with you. So that's what we want to do, and I think that's where the value lies. I wanted to just summarize very briefly the data sharing incentives at the level of carrots. I think it is the quality stamp, provided it's done properly, which we can do and are doing. The credibility it gives, the advantage for younger investigators that they can add at the end of their CV not only their publication list, but also their data DOIs that they have provided. And if they don't have space for it, they can have one line which links to an eBrain search that gives their complete list. And for group leaders, the fact that they actually will have the data available, which sometimes in certain types of research environments can be a problem over time. So there are these obvious carrots. Regarding the sticks, well, we all know about those and requirements from society. And let's hope that it's primarily the carrots that will drive us and move us in the forward. One small reminder, when journals were introduced 300 years ago, it was not just everyone moving in. That took time and a lot of resistance. Are we really going to tell everything and show it and publish it? But it was done because it was technically possible. If journals had been introduced now, would we then say, no, show me just one table here. I don't want to see what you've been doing. I don't think so. So it's a quite natural thing that the data sharing comes with the new technological opportunities we have.
I want to, Mara, you mentioned an important point. I think the long-term storage and the reusability of old data. So I think that's slightly going away from the previous topic, but I also want to move on from that. I think that's quite important because we talked about the value. Why would you share it? I think here is another value. If it's there for long term, it's not only for your own publications, but it's also to reuse it with new technologies. That's quite important. So I'd like to see if anybody wants to add something to that discussion. Petra?
Maybe it is related. It's not directly this discussion, but I think it's equally important. It's a quality assurance of the data. This point was made by Philip, I think. And I wanted to share that in my experience, when we are sharing our data, usually the people who receive the data find some problems with those data. And this is extremely valuable because we detect what is wrong with the data, and just sharing data already is a quality assurance mechanism that works extremely well. So of course, there are also the problems raised by Philip, and we need to ensure that the data that are being shared and research is done on have good quality. But who else, if not the community, should detect problems with such data? So typically, you oversee in your own lab, there's a student working on the data. You as a PI will not touch every data set and look into all the details. But as soon as more people are looking at the data, you will find out if there are problems. And I think this is extremely valuable. And for me, this is personally a large motivation to share data, just to get clarity about the quality and get feedback on the data.
I may just one comment. This is true, and of course this is very useful. But I think there should be a baseline. I mean, to try to homogenize criteria, curation, etc. Because otherwise, it's really difficult to navigate across the data. In some cases, it's even difficult to understand what is the quality of the data. You know.
Yep. Jan, I think I was expecting you to comment on that, because curation and actually the quality of data is actually one of the areas we want to be very strong in, right?
Absolutely, it's a key point. So what we're doing there is we have established a curation workflow, and we had to work also on the metadata schemas and these underlying things such as the ontologies and stuff like that, because the neuroscience field did not have any really ready-made solution that could be applied more at the general level. So that's been done now. It doesn't mean that it solves everything, but it solves kind of the first type of unification you can have on many heterogeneous types of data. And then there's room for a lot of research on the specialized areas with regard to how to add various types of metadata that will increase the value of the data. Now, whatever level of depth this is done with, it all depends on resources and what's available at any point in time, what can be done realistically. Our strategy has been always to have a curation of a basic set of metadata. That's a 100% key requirement. To support that, to make it happen. And then to continue to let the fields evolve and to let more detailed metadata schemas to develop as the fields are changing and as we have capacity to have more additional values added to the data at that level. This is critical if we're going to make really use of the data in the future. Otherwise, we cannot have a situation where data sharing is more like supplementary data to a journal article, which is just an isolated piece. That doesn't give a relevant integration. So that's the strategy. We think it is worthwhile to continue along those lines. And that means that now neuroscience has the opportunity to really move into that field and to say, we have these opportunities. So whenever we compete with other disciplines, there's nothing that should hold us back.
Okay. I saw Valerie raising the hand.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Valerie Gailustona, and I'm from the Primus cluster here. What I would like to do is to just comment on what Jan said before about the cultural change of sharing data. And I think there is a big change now in this assumption what you can do with data sharing, since the COVID research shows now what is possible and how fast it is possible and how fast you get a feedback about the quality also of the data, if it's possible really to judge about the quality that fast. But it shows that there is a change again, and a very rapid change. And I think going back will be tough, and it will come to all the other areas too, that we will see this change. And I hope and I believe it will happen that not changing and not sharing data will be something that will be awkward somehow. So therefore, just take the COVID research into the thinking. This is the new benchmark of how to share data.
I think that's a very good proof point we had indeed in the last couple of months. I mean, I think there's a couple of other points that have not been mentioned, but which I think also important when we talk about sharing the data. That is actually also on the EBRAINS platform. It's the results, coupling actually data, raw data, with the results, that you also can go back to those results and the provenance of of those results, so that link always exists. It's a bit coming back to the remark that was made on long-term data storage. I think it's important to keep all of those links, which is why we have the technical solution of the knowledge graph. And that's one of the important things that I also wanted to add to this. Now I'm going to wind it back a bit, and because I think it's an interesting discussion. But we talk about incentives for data sharing. We talked about technical solutions. We talked about taking away some of the hurdles of that, even including funding. But I would like to ask you, how important is data sharing for you at the moment? Is this something that is now critical for the cluster research, or for the work that you're doing now, or is this something that is, well, we're actually developing a roadmap for it now? So if anybody, Tilo, you wanted to react to that?
Yeah, it's crucial. It's very, very important. It's the most timely problem that we are facing now, and I think that this is why we need to proactively take what is there as a legal restraint or limitations. I wouldn't even see it as a restraint. The GDPR is, I think, a huge step forward. But just to go back to cycle back to the incentives, I think that to look at the bigger picture, we're all scientists. So why do we do what we do? It's certainly not for the money. Okay, so it's not like we're all getting rich because of what we do. So we're intrinsically motivated, very clearly, by exactly what Hella mentioned, these higher principles of being. So that's a given. It's not something that we should mention. But at the same time, of course, there is also recognition, for example, as a currency of incentive. And traditionally, of course, you would acquire data, you would analyze the data, then you would publish it, and you would get recognition for that piece of publication, and that is a huge incentive. But when you give data away that you acquired, and if you don't have any incentive scheme in place, then this can be lost. And if you look at ADNI, for example, as one of the principal, or one of the first databases that in human brain imaging that was completely open, there are people who were part of the ADNI founders, basically, and people who contributed. They are always mentioned as a contributor and as an author. While this may be possible in some instantiations of data sharing, it may not be the way to go forward, because it's limited to kind of this one parcel of data sharing. So I'm thinking about, if it would be possible to find a credit system that somehow links the piece of data that is used in a publication to the people who actually did the work in providing that data, in getting the data in the first place. For example, in the clinician sense, the people who actually talk to the patients, who do the scorings, who do the imaging, who do everything. So is there a way to invent a new system of currency, like a kind of blockchain technology or something that links this effort to the piece of data that is then used in scientific merits?
That's a very interesting point, Jan. you can, yes.
I think it's a very good point, and there's a way to go there. The first step is actually to be able to track citations, DOI citations, and there are ways of investigating that, but we're trying to work on solving that so that you can directly count number of direct citations of data sets per se. But I fully agree that these are important questions to work on.
Mara, you also wanted to react?
In fact, I completely agree with Thilo. In the clinical research community, I think the motivation is much clearer. Probably in the preclinical field, it's a little more uneven. Not everyone sees the value of sharing, for example, behavioral data. And you can see it also in the number of behavioral data sets that are deposited. And it's also, I think, because it's not very clear how to do it and what would be the value of reusing those data. Instead, for example, an example in which it's very clear where you get the value of that is in the neuroanatomy field, right? Or in the omic field, it's obvious because they also ask you in the journals to deposit your data, right? And then you can do meta-analysis, you can reuse the, let's say, raw data. But it's not even in all the fields or in neuromorphology. Everybody or many people uses neuromorpho data to model or to incorporate, let's say, generative models, etc. So in some fields it's clearer, and I think it's probably a lack of ways of reusing those data. You see what I mean? And this affects several areas of preclinical research, of basic research.
I would like just to go further into that. So I think, Mara, you are maybe not aware about the International Mouse Phenotyping Consortium.
Yes.
Which is an initiative that has been running for more than 10 years, aiming at making the catalog of the gene function in the mouse model system. And all the data, which are captured by, I think, more than 13 centers across the world, are made available. All the raw data are available. And I can show you, I'm now the vice president of this initiative, and I can show you that it is deeply investigated by people working in the clinical fields in order to find new candidates for disease, for example. And they can not only take the analysis which is done currently under this program, which is available on site, but they can also go back to the raw data and make their own analysis. So everything is open here. So there are some communities who already started to share data at a larger scale. And indeed, you can see the benefits by the number of publications which are done now by people who are not a partner of this initiative, but who are taking this information and putting them into a new pipeline of analysis. So it can work. But of course, we have to discuss, and it takes us in the mouse field more than 10 years to define standards, protocols, metadata that could be collected homogeneously across the world. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I thought that you'd answer to this, because this is one of the very few initiatives in which the whole pipeline has been worked on, right? What I'm referring is more in general. This is not obvious in all the communities. You see what I mean? So this is why I think that for the neuroscience, we should do the same with neurophysiology data, with other, so this is one of the examples that it can work, but I don't think we are still there. Right? We are yet there.
Sabine, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment here. I think the difference here is that this initiative really came out of the genetics field and incorporated aspects of the neuroscience field, but this is not primarily a neuroscience initiative. And I think that's the difference here. And now we're trying to make the link. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let me see, is there...
May I?
Yeah, Valerie, yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that too, since this is really a success story, but that also meant, first of all, a lot of capacity and engagement of people really discussing standards. And still, it's a never-ending story, and it looks like people need to be on track. And on the second thing is so and really fight for the standards. It's hard, and but the great thing at the end, you see the big thing is only good if you add data to it. So if you have holes in there, then it's not so easy to work with the data. So there's another incentive. The more you put in, the better it's getting. So and this is also what we learn. And the third thing, it takes a lot of money. So just money for meeting, discussion, and for having bioinformatics and a big group who's just only one big IT group who's for the quality control, that the data from the centers are entered into the database and thrown out or pushed back if it's not okay. And if the data is there and curated, then there's another group in another center who's just doing the analysis on the data and also developing and moving onwards always. So this is the EBI, just trying to get most out of the data. So it really costs money and resources. Just this short part, not talking about generating the data. And this is a hard effort, a strong effort.
Okay. Do I see any other hands raised? At the moment, not. We look at my list of questions that I had. Just need to open it on a different computer. Yeah, there's in the, I see in the chat. Ignacio, maybe you want to comment on that in the. You brought something up in the chat on the data sharing. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, and apologies for connecting later. I don't know if you were aware about this project run by Elixir, which is the infrastructure on life sciences data. So it's not only about neuroscience, but all life sciences, but a good component on health. And this project has just started. If you see in the link, they will develop a kind of toolkit for data management, and they are developing guidelines for how to produce a data management plan, or how to have fair data, and some others. For instance, because of the COVID crisis, they develop quite quickly a platform for storing data, and so that could be used by other scientists in other countries. So it's a good example on how COVID has had an impact also in, as it was mentioned, in other areas, research areas. So it's worth to look at, because it gives not only how to use data, but also as an archive, repositories, and how to make the best use of data. So I think it's good to have that in mind, at least have a look at how they're doing. Thank you.
Jan?
Yeah, just add to that, there are 13 life science research infrastructures in Europe, I think around that number. Elixir is definitely one of them, and I completely agree that we as a new infrastructure, focusing on neuroscience, specializing in that area, of course, are building on and not reinventing any wheels. Absolutely. So we build on top of all the experiences of the research infrastructures to get what we need for neuroscience.
That's one thing I did pick up in this last discussion is, okay, I think there's many tools available, but we clearly need to have some focus on the standardization and some leadership around that, and that's clearly needed. And I think it's also, I mean, I have some experience in standardization. This is an evolving area as well, probably also in science. So that also means that revisiting of existing metadata and applying that to new metadata or new schemes would make the data reusable. So that's also something that we need to take back from this discussion and see whether we can reuse that. I think, Mara, did you want to comment further? Or?
Just to reinforce a little bit what Jan was saying. In fact, Elixir is great, and there are others for life sciences. But I think we really need something more dedicated to neuroscience, because this has very specific needs, right? And also, I'd like to say, because Nacho is here, that it's very important that also at the national level, we have funding for everything that we mentioned in this discussion, right? Because at the European level, it's growing, but at the national level, I think we are still a little bit behind, not just in Spain, in many countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Anybody else want to bring another topic for discussion? Any hands raised? So we move tack a bit here. No.
Jan has Jan Harold.
Yeah, I just want to add. I think it's very good that we as a neuroscientists, we focus on very precise aspect of our research, and in order to share the results of the research for future use. But I think what I'm really confused by also some national initiative in which I try to tell you, okay, because I'm belonging to 3 different funding bodies which are bringing money into my institute, and they say, I have a repository for data, I have another one, and that's it. And I need to send my data to these 3 or 4 repository, plus maybe the neuroscientists, plus maybe the other one. And I think this starts to be a bit messy at the moment. So I'm afraid, and the situation that is not really clear, there are many initiatives which are not going into, of course, they go to the same direction, but they use many different paths. And at the end, I'm a scientist, and I have a limited time to send my data to all those sites. So we need something much more stronger here.
Mm-hmm. Jan, you wanted to comment on that?
I have a concrete proposal. In that situation, if you find the EBRAINS services relevant, you request a curation there, you place all the data there, and then if there are 3 other actors that asks you to just dump the data, which I assume is the case because they probably don't offer any curation service or any high visibility or anything. Well, if they do that, either give them the link or say, well, we can download and you get the package here, thank you. And you're all done. How does that sound?
It will increase also the safety of the management of the resource. For example, in France, we had a problem recently with a big place which was devoted to storing the data. We just got on fire for a day, and they lose a lot of data. Even there are duplications. So I think it's really important also that we envisage this type of security level.
Needless to say, what we're discussing now is, of course, animal research data where everything is fine with the compliance, and the anonymized human data falls into the category. When it comes to personal data, what we're doing is to try to now immediately solve something at the boundary of being anonymized, strongly pseudonymized, de-identified data, where for practical purposes, the chances of getting back to individuals is extremely low. There we have some solutions which are fairly easy, but they do provide a security level. Beyond that, we're into the secure storage and other discussions, yes.
Martin, you did raise your hand as well.
Yeah, it's. I'm looking at the time and where we are in the discussion. I think we're approaching a natural break point where we could take a couple of minutes and then come back to the conclusions and more interestingly, the next steps. I mean, Jan's already trying to jump the gun on that one, but I think we're really getting to the point where we're going past abstract discussions about what the bright future could look like and more in how can we help bring it about and which part should move first and which hopefully last or never. So how about we break there and maybe come back in 10, 15 minutes? What's the feeling in the room? How long should we do the break?
15 would be fine.
The funder decided it's 15 minutes. I'll see you all in 15 minutes.
No one else.
We wouldn't dare, disagree with you, Avella. Okay, so everybody back at 12:35 if you can.
So it's 12:36 and we are going to restart. And we would now come to the conclusion and next step session, except there is a very urgent question that relates to the last session. Anything remaining? Yes, no, perhaps? This is a no? No. Okay, in that case, Martin, floor is yours.
Okay. So, oops, sorry, hang on. Let me go back. Okay, let's add a bit of a preamble to this. So these are the conclusions that I extracted. Over the next 20 minutes, I think let's try to converge on what are the main points that we are seeing when we're thinking conclusions and sensible next steps. So let me quickly run through both slides, and then maybe I think let's go back to the first one and the second one. Again, let's make this a discussion if PowerPoint allows me to do that. Okay, so for conclusions, I like the perspective of reality on the ground, because it keeps us grounded into what is it that is going on Monday through Friday and not just in workshops and symposia. So one theme that I think was important, and it was really the main thing that stuck out for me as in the first discussion, is that the new data-related roles and responsibilities are here. They're not some kind of future thing anymore. They're here. And for most projects, there will need to be somebody that is designated the person that writes the data management plan. And for organizations, they will need to deal with the reality that they are data owners, and in some regards, they're data controllers. That is an organizational problem. It's not a problem of the researchers that work at these organizations. They're being outsourced that responsibility, but something to keep in mind. The data owner is not the individual researcher, it's the organization they're working with. But again, these are nuances that need to be part of this discussion because these new data-related roles and responsibilities are something new. There's a difference, a clearly visible difference with respect to perspectives on data with regard to preclinical and clinical. So this is something to keep in mind, that groups that are working predominantly on preclinical or clinical might have very different perspectives. Even though they understand each other, it's not top of their mind when they come into discussions. And that data sharing, I would say at this point, it doesn't feel like it's a technical problem so much anymore that it was, let's say, a decade ago or so, but that it's mostly an agreement on what do we find acceptable? What are minimal metadata standards that everybody in the community is willing and able to accept? How are they providing this? Where are they providing this? And the same thing is also true for the quality of the data that is shared. And that how do we deal with this? And this goes along the dimensions of data discovery, data sharing, data reusability. If data discovery is a single web page that everybody goes to and it's coded in HTML1, fine, let's go for that. But it needs to be something that a group, let's call it community, accepts as this is how we're doing it, and then moves on from there, rather than 50 different solutions where every lab comes up with their own solution, and then there's just loss of time, really. Incentives are a big thing. There's, I mean, let's make it clear, there's a difference between obligation and incentive, and the difference is usually motivation, that the incentive gets you more motivated to go and do stuff that, you know, is in everybody's interest, and a lot of times is expected implicitly. There's a huge difference between short-term data sharing and let's call it data legacies. Individual postdocs want to do quick data sharing because it helps them for their CV, for their next job. Whereas labs and organizations, I think over time will start to look into data legacies in the sense of what is it that we brought to the table in the long game over the last 20 years, over the last 50 years, over the last 100 years. And there are varying costs associated with that. Short-term data sharing might be something easy, something quick, but costs for reusing that data then afterwards are potentially not kept in mind, because here it is, have fun with that and good luck, versus, well, this needs to be updated, it needs to be reformatted, it needs to be adjusted to changing ontologies, changing formats, these kinds of things. And from our discussions, I get the impression that everybody's involved in the data discussion. but it's not always clear where the discussion is and if all the different stakeholders are involved in the discussion and how. And again, here I'm not talking researcher, but researchers, funders, policy, researchers themselves, the organizations that support the researchers, and professional societies. So at points, it felt like that we all have a bit of it, but it's very hard to get everybody together in a meeting and say, okay, let's look at the situation that we actually have here. And I think there's an acknowledgement that at least for clinical data, if not yet for preclinical data, COVID-19 acts as an accelerator. A lot of these things have been going on for a while, but COVID-19 changes to the environment really forced us to start to think about, so how do we share this data now with somebody that needs it tomorrow for something, and what is the effect on the publishing life cycle and these kinds of things. So these are the high-level conclusions I draw from this, and I'd like to thank all of you for this very productive, very interesting, very engaging discussions and presentations. Now here comes the tricky part. Next steps, what do we do about it now? So if I summarize this, I see three potential next steps. I think that data sharing needs to be a bigger discussion. The discussions I've seen, again, are individual segments of the bigger discussions. And I see really two different things here. There are local constraints and opportunities. If we get all the researchers in Belgium together, we might be able to get a quick agreement on certain aspects that affect all of them. So we have national and we have regional differences and opportunities. And we have different stakeholder perspectives. I loved the exchange between, quote unquote, Hella as the funder and some of the researchers in here, because it brought a very different perspective to the same issue. And some of these discussions were quickly resolved in the sense of, well, those are the different perspectives and that's what we got. It would have been great having somebody from policy in here also that says, yeah, but don't expect us to fix that over new policies. We're here to cauterize things that we see are going in the wrong direction, or we're trying to guide this. The next part for next steps for me is really a sentiment that I'm getting, not just in this workshop, but in others, that we need less guidelines and more guidance. There are guidelines everywhere, left and right, but it's very hard to figure out how these guidelines are connected to each other. Are they complementary to each other? Are they competing with each other? So identification of expertise in some of these aspects of data sharing definitely is a plus, in the sense of I can reach out to this email address, I can find this person, here's somebody I can talk to that has some experience in this space. Maybe not the entire space, but at least the aspects that I'm dealing with at the moment. And then while we're seeing a reduction of the entry barrier, technically speaking, in the sense of their websites, you can log in, you can create identities and these kinds of things. There's also the temptation of, well, one-off solutions. I got a problem, let me quickly code something up and done. So I think while we're seeing really that the barriers are something that can be overcome by conversations, by putting technical solutions forward, we also need to be aware that one-offs actually cost us more in the long run than they usually provide, because that's what they are. They're a quick fix for something where we haven't come up with a solution as a community. So with this, let me maybe shut up and get people's input on both the conclusion and what we could do in terms of next steps, because there's a variety of different things that we could do, from let's write a white paper to let's have another workshop to let's send an email around with pointers. And I'd like to get your input and feedback. Should I take the slides off, or should I leave them on? How do we want to do this?
Leave on.
Leave on. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe let's go back to the conclusion slide. Did I miss big things, or did I misunderstand things in the discussions?
Can I comment?
Please, please.
I think you summed it up beautifully. I would just really like to emphasize that data quality assurance aspect. To me, this is really key. Valeri has already talked about that we spend and still spend a lot of time with this in the IMPC, and it's always the first question I'm getting asked when I present what we do in IMPC in a neuroscience community. You know, how do I know what the data you've produced is actually valuable and is good data? And I think this applies to any kind of data, also human data. You know, just because it's human, it doesn't mean that it's automatically qualitatively, you know, 100% perfect. And I would really like to have this in the next steps being, you know, included, that the data quality assurance, you know, how is that being done? How is that actually ensured that the human data that comes in is also, you know, somehow quality controlled? I agree totally with what Petra Ritter said at some point, that, you know, PIs, you know, don't look at the data, you know, that the students or postdocs generate, and then just, if, you know, the whole community works on it and finds problems, then you you know, you pick up on it that there are problems. But I don't like this. You know, I think it shouldn't be like this. I think the quality control should, on a much larger level, be much earlier. You know, just because now we can deal with all these tons of data, you know, it shouldn't force us to do that quality control step and these discussions later on. Thank you.
So
pre-hoc
quality. Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Petra.
Yeah, so actually I fully agree, quality control is important and it should start, of course, in the lab. But what we can also not ignore is that mistakes will be always made. And this is part of our work, and we have to accept that and to embrace this. There will be errors in data. And this has been in the past the case, this will be the case in the future. We need to establish an error culture, dealing with these errors, learning from errors, and making them obvious and transparent. And just saying, okay, only data without errors can be published, this is simply not possible. There will be always errors in data. And learning from the community where the errors are and how we can avoid them in the future is a very good strategy, I would think.
Hella, you got your hand up?
Yeah, if I may drop in here, perhaps this is a very good opportunity to advertise our quality assurance workshops, which we're going to organize. And I'm very happy to announce early at this stage, very preliminary, that Dr. Hölter, so the Primos cluster, will be involved in that. And yeah, so we will construct a very nice curriculum, and I would really like to advertise for the clusters to send it as much early career researchers or as much principal investigators as I want. So we will share via EBRA as soon as possible agenda and invitation and everything. The other thing that came to my mind, this is something concerning, again, the incentives, and that relates to something that was said in the talks, that some bigger parts of the data are stored in clouds. I mean, cloud is not a virtual thing. It is basically a server standing somewhere. It's a hardware thing. And as we have learned recently from the fire in the down from Strasbourg, a huge storage for servers just burned down completely. And many companies and many institutions, they had absolutely no backups because that was costly. And they didn't want to invest into security matters, so they had only this one storage. Of course, it was mentioned as a cloud, but I mean, still, it is a server. If that is burned, the data are gone forever. So even in case, if we as funders could provide resources for long-term storage, should there always be, let's say, the precondition that have at least 2 or 3 as a backup? And I mean, there are some other as I see from the moment, there are some other conditions which might become difficult because we do project funding and not long-term, not institutional funding. So we can only, let's say, fund storage for 3 years, but not forever. This is simply impossible according to the rules. However, what from the data experts, what is your recommendation? Having rather 3 than 2 and minimum 2, just as a backup?
If I may just start reacting to this. So for example, from a hospital IT perspective, and the virtual research environment that I showed you earlier is established at the Charité, there are availability strategies, backup strategies, and there are distributed computing centers that ensure that if there is an incident in one center, there will be a backup in the other one. So this is part of a good IT research infrastructure, as it is required, for example, in hospitals. And it is also part of some of the clouds that are under development. So on an European level, but also on national levels, there are clouds under development that are funded by national and European funding agencies, where exactly also such availability strategies are implemented. And I think this is exactly a very important point, and many researchers actually are not aware of this. When I'm asking them what is the backup strategy, then they know sometimes that there is something that the IT center is doing, but what exactly the schedule is, how long the data are being maintained, what the regularity is of the backupping, so how long would be data recoverable after they are being overwritten. This is often unknown, but this is the standard, basically, policy or concept of every good IT center. And of course, this needs to be also aware of with the researchers, that they inquire about this and know about this. And if there's such a research infrastructure provided as a service for researchers, then of course this information needs to be also available and as part of the use terms and of the user agreement at the end.
Go ahead, Jan.
Okay, yes. Just briefly back to quality. It's very nice to see that the discussion around quality is triggered by data sharing. That tells us something about the importance of this. I'm really looking forward to a quality assurance workshop. It's tremendously important. My hope and assumption is that this aspect is something that really lives inside the research groups and should be dealt with by the research groups. And the reasons for saying that is that, for example, when we receive data and a curation team are looking at what's coming in, they can help with the metadata standards. They can help with certain rules for organizing data in the containers and so on. But they are not the specialists. The specialists are with the research group. So the quality assurance, please let it be with the research groups, and let us develop cultures around how they introduce different checkpoints, key checkpoints. That's my take on it, at least. And regarding storage, I don't know if Stephen wants to talk about it, but it's really critical, of course. And by using professional services at the European level, we should be able to work efficiently with this. Is my very brief answer, and then there can be more longer versions of it, of course.
Let me just quickly comment on that. I think it's a quite important point, but I think Petra puts it correctly. It's basically, for me, it's a requirement that has to be implemented at the research infrastructure level. Not of worry, let's say, of the individual scientist or individual researcher. It should be there. I mean, we need to make sure that the IT infrastructure that we are using is actually safe. I mean, I have some experience in this field, and those fires indeed do happen. So it's the reason why you have to have at least 2 sites. There's no way around it. And if you otherwise, I mean, you couldn't even. For me, it can't even be called a cloud. Cloud means it's available, and of course there is cost associated with that. But that's really why we need to build a research infrastructure that is maintainable and that is sustainable, also including those requirements. So that's something that we definitely have to take up. Yeah.
Petra, you still have your hand up, but I assume it's from before, which means Jan is up next. Jan, please.
Jan Hero, huh? Okay. No, just a comment about the quality of the data. I think it's very difficult to assess that. Of course, in the IMPC, it's different because we have a lot of baseline data and we can really assess the quality of the data which are collected, because we always ask a control baseline to be provided. But I think what will be important, and this is something which is also done in the IMPC, is to have the complete protocol, the complete detailed protocol attached to the data set so that you can go back to that. Because without this information, and of course the metadata also list is very important, but without this information, it's very difficult to reuse the data and to manage any differences that you can find in between two data sets. So, if you look now to the publication, especially to the high-level publication where you are limited by space, of course you can have hundreds of pages of supplementary information, but usually the protocols are very, very little information attached to. So I think if you want to keep those data, to make them available, you should also consider as a metadata the protocol that is being used to capture the data.
I'm aware of the time, so let me move on maybe to the next steps and propose a couple of simple but outrageous solutions. So if I'm looking at the four next steps, and again, they're just topical things to group together, they're not really next steps yet. So data sharing needs to be a bigger discussion. I think we could use this workshop as an example of saying, look, in this workshop, we brought together people from different backgrounds, from different interests. Some of them gladly actually fall into different stakeholder groups and perspectives. But I think this is something where if we take a step back from EBRA and clusters and HVP and these kinds of things, this is something that we could try to move forward because we have a lot of different perspectives. And like Hella just said, hey, data assurance workshop, this is something where we could follow up on this as part of the EBRA network of saying, look, what else is happening in this space with respect to this discussion? What are the next meetings? What are the next workshops? Do we feel there's a gap that we should try to bridge with another workshop organized either by EBRA or by one of the organizations that are part of this workshop, or where we just know they are in this space and we ask them kindly to work with us on this. I think with respect to quality assurance, it feels like it's an ongoing discussion where, again, as long as we have some kind of communication going on this, it helps us to say, okay, I'm ready to participate in this discussion versus I have a pointer here to something that people should be aware of because they're from a different community and they don't know how this works in our community. So on that one, I would say maybe let's go and see what the discussion is when it's focused specifically on quality. So in that case, I encourage everybody to participate and show up to the workshop that Hella will share. And I think we'll pick it up after to see what else we want to do on this, what else is going to be proposed in that workshop to continue that part of the discussion. With guidance versus guidelines, and the same thing for reducing barriers and one-off solutions, given that HVP has a bit of an activity in that space, maybe we can share some of the things that we found useful when other research communities approached us and started to engage with us on what guidance we can offer and what would be potentially of interest to also, again, the groups represented here. And for reducing entry barriers, I think, we're already starting in that discussion of saying what is it that makes it easier. And we're not talking here about how easy is it to add metadata, but how easy is it to actually reduce the burden of entry in some of the locations? Is this possible in a hospital setting for this solution, or is there something else that is needed to make it possible for regulatory people in the hospital to say that is an acceptable solution, that is okay, versus a 6-month review cycle oh God, this is not going anywhere, but it looked so good on the outside. So in terms of concrete next things, it feels like there's nothing specific that jumps out at me where we're saying we need another workshop here, let's do a white paper there or something like this. But this is something that we probably should follow up in an email after this discussion, where everybody had a bit more time to reflect on what would be natural next steps in the environment that they currently are in. Maybe some of these things are covered by professional society meetings that exist in certain topical spaces or really domain spaces that would make it a natural connecting point. I'm sorry if this is a bit vague, but I didn't see anybody go like, white paper, let's do white paper. Damien.
Yes, maybe white paper is what is in my mind. I think most of the issues that have been raised here are not unique to the EBRA clusters, but maybe some other research groups are experiencing these issues. But the solutions that we have presented here today are maybe a little bit novel, and some of the other issues that have not been resolved can also help others. Is it possible maybe to summarize the proceedings of this workshop and then publish it for other people to also benefit from?
I'd say gut feeling. What's people's gut feeling on trying to write the results and the discussions of the workshop up and use it as a way to make the discussion bigger or to raise attention to what we talked about?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, it was not to be expected to come out of such a starting workshop in being able to write a white paper with recommendations for the entire scientific community on the preclinical, clinical level, and also for policymakers and EU funding. So, I mean, that, that would be asked for.
Slow. It's okay.
But I mean, to collect opinions and standpoints, and moreover to have seen what EBRAINS is able to provide. If that, I think that is a very good starting point. Of course, this will not be the first and not the last discussion on that, and probably also not the workshop, but as an intermediate point to see what's up on the scene and where are the problems. This was a really perfect start. Yeah, well, a point in between among EBRA. So from my side, thank you very, very much. I learned a lot and I highly appreciated all the presentations.
Okay, that feels like we're reaching the end. Okay, so quick summary. Data quality assurance workshop by Hella will reach you over an email sent by EBRA. Please show up. Next concrete steps in the sense of, okay, what came out of this? Where can you find video recordings if everybody's fine with sharing? Please send updated slides because not all the slides were completely updated when we got them. So we can circulate this, and then concrete next actions that you think we could take. For example, show up to Society of X meeting because they're going to talk about that, or upcoming opportunity for introducing some of these topics to groups that should have been here. Let us know, and then we'll internally talk in EBRA how we could go about writing some of the things that were part of the discussion up into a first draft, and where we say, look, we definitely need another workshop because that's just a paragraph and this should be a page long. And that's it from what I can see. You can tell me to shut up and end the workshop. I'm fine with that too. Maybe let's just do that. I see many people nodding. Okay, I will shut up. Like Hella, I'd like to thank you all for participating. I'd like to thank the organizers for making sure that there was something to talk about. And thank you all for joining this conversation. Watch your inbox. There's at least 1 or 2 mails coming your way from EBRA.